does one of the world's most advanced fighter jets, a French-made Rafale, get shot down by a Chinese rival? What does it say about the shifting balance of power between Chinese weapon systems and their Western counterparts? Between May 7th and 10th, India and Pakistan, two nuclear-armed neighbors, were locked in their most serious military confrontation in 2 decades. Pakistani forces reportedly shot down a Rafale fighter jet belonging to the Indian Air Force. India had acquired the jets in 2019 as part of a major upgrade to its air power. Western media outlets confirmed the incident, citing American and French military officials and military analysts who verified images of debris. Pakistan is believed to have carried out the strike using Chinese-made J-10 fighter jets. Those jets were armed with PL-15E air-to-air missiles. This was the first time those Chinese weapons were used in a real-world combat scenario. India's Rafale, by comparison, are equipped with Meteor missiles, a European system known for its range, speed, and accuracy. To understand how this aerial showdown unfolded and what it tells us about the region's shifting military dynamics, I spoke with Andrew Davidson, a military analyst at Geopolitical Futures. Let's get into that conversation. Thank you so much, Andrew, for talking to me. And I'm hoping to pick your brains and use your expertise in this. You've been watching the India-Pakistan conflict unfolding. Let me ask you this. What kind of evidence are you or US experts, defense experts, military experts, what kind of evidence are you guys looking at to determine what weaponry is being used from both sides?
Now, with this day and age, a lot of the imagery have been showing up online of the cartridges for the PL-15 Echoes, the export model of it in particular. So it can be verified that those were utilized. Now, as for everything else, it's speculation. Like you saw this morning, India Today was claiming that they had shot down one of the Pakistan AWACS, their advanced warning, command aircraft and stuff, which doesn't tie into what's coming out on the PAC stance, doesn't tie into what's being announced on the ground by local sources and everything. So with today's day of media and anybody can be anything, you get a lot of bad information, a lot of false information. And so right now it's coming down to actual footage, actual cartridges on the ground spent and everything like that. Because we can see when China started sending Pakistan different weapons and different equipment, their J-10s, Charlie Echoes, which are their export version as well of their J-10 Charlies. So we can see when they're starting to be utilized, but we've never seen them in combat before. So everybody's talking about the PL-10 missile and the Echo, the export version, which is
PL-15, you mean?
Yes,
PL-15,
yeah, PL-15 Echo version, which is their export version, which has the main difference between the export version and their domestic version is the range it has. The range is calculated anywhere between 200 and 300 kilometers for their personal version, the domestic Chinese version. Their export version only goes up to 145 kilometers for the PL.
So I do a lot of this, and I'm sorry I'm interfering. I spent a whole day saying, yes, you're saying 5, but where's the evidence? This evidence, and I started sending pictures to friends like you who are experts, and one person said this can just be an external fuel tank. The plane may not have crashed, etc. What do you look for when you see the footage of a destroyed part of a plane? Can you, as a defense expert, look at the serial number? And is there a database that you can go back to and say, yes, this is part of a wing because the serial number corresponds to this? How do you do that cross-checking?
Now, that is a way to do it, but a lot of the footages that you get are just local people. They're not looking for certain tail numbers, certain footage. Like a lot of things that are going off right now is different. And a lot of false stuff where it's a plane shot down and it's being claimed online that it's India shooting down a PAC plane or vice versa. But then you dig deeper and it's, from 2019 and stuff. And, we've we've seen this constantly since the push of Web 2.0, social media, and how fast disinformation, misinformation, or too much information can, can derail your analysis, can derail everything you thought you knew about a situation. So it's extremely difficult to try to hammer down exactly what's true and what's false. Now, obviously, you have your major news networks that usually have a little bit more reliability than lower local news that might have more of a political agenda to, what they're writing about. So when you're going to try to verify, especially pictures and videos online, there's multiple different ways you can utilize AI to be able to see if it's been doctored, to see if it's been posted it before and where it's been posted at, and it could be years ago and stuff. So there is a long process of trying to verify what's been actually happened when one side is saying they shot something down, the other side is saying we haven't lost any aircraft. And that's just how warfare is going to continue to be, because you don't want your local populace getting the understanding that these weapon systems and your defense and your capabilities aren't as strong as you originally thought.
Yeah,
So
no military wants to say we lost even a small part of a battle, let alone
yes.
you know.
You saw the flooding in media both by pro-Russian sources and pro-Western sources when American equipment like the Bradleys and stuff and Abrams were getting into Ukraine. The first one that was lost, was just blown up online. Like, they can't stand up to anything. I mean, the crew survived, which that's what it's supposed to do. But it's just this is China's testing ground in Pakistan and in India, because they're going against weapon systems that they would utilize if they were going against India, and everything. And you look at how both of them are postured, you look at both of their doctrines and everything. So the thing that makes this so significant is everybody's talking about the PL 15 and everything, and that's great. But if you match it against what Rafales are supposed to carry, their Meteor missiles, which are air-to-air missiles and stuff, they have a longer range. They might be a little bit slower. They don't hit the Mach 4, Mach 5, like they barely hit Mach 4. When the Rafales fly, usually 1.8, Mach 1.8 or 2.2. But the thing is, so the PL-15 Echo is a good air-to-air system. It's, challenges the US's AIM 120 system and stuff, but the US is already working on their 260 AIM, which is gonna, give them back the capability to be the strongest in, the realm, pretty much.
And how
But
soon are we talking about that?
that's supposedly it's in production, not production, I'm sorry. Supposedly it's in testing. The 260 AIM and stuff like that is in testing. I haven't seen a fielded date for it as of yet. Right now, the US is still main armament is the 120 AIM. But side by side with the PL-15 Echo and everything like that, like there's not too many of a differences. Now, you have to look at the situation. How did 4.5, generation Rafale gets shot down by a 4.5, J-10 Charlie. And,
Now
you're
we're talking, for our audience who may not know the difference, now we're talking not just the missile, but the plane that was carrying the load.
Yes, because the distance of the meteor is farther out. So if you're just looking at the weapon used, you'd be like the Rafale should have been able to shoot down the J-10. But the actual systems on board of those the 4.5 generations of those two craft are different. The J-10 has they both have ASA radars, which is active array radar system instead of passive, where instead of basically having a satellite array having to point in a direction, the active method makes it so you don't have to turn any type of dishes or anything for it to be able to track and everything. It also can track multiple targets. So both of them have that. Now, the target range and the detection range on the J-10 is better than on the Rafale. So the J-10 could have targeted and detected the Rafale before it was noticed it and shot it. Now, it only takes anywhere from like 80 seconds as soon as that PL-15 Echo is shot, since it hits Mach 4, Mach 5. It takes 80 seconds to be able to make it 130 kilometers. And once you get in between that 30 to 50 kilometer range, it's the no survivability rate.
So let me ask you again in layman's terms. What you're saying is the radar on J-10 has a longer range than on Rafale. And what might have happened is that Rafale might not even have known that it was in range when the rocket, the PL-15E, was fired.
Now, this is, yes, ma'am. And this is where we go into more scenario based of how that could happen. Now, one of the ways is one of those AWACS that we were talking about, the command aircraft or advanced warning system aircraft and command aircraft, already in the air in Pakistan. Now, without the J-10 having to utilize its radars, which will give it a radar signature, which sensors can pick up if you have a massive amount of radar or radio waves in one area, that's how you're tracked. So if you have the AWACS up in the air, it basically makes it so it can range farther using your AWACS. It's digitally linked with that aircraft. Now the AWACS can have a range of 500 kilometers and be able to have, it's basically like a moving radar in the sky. So it can have 500 kilometers, it can pinpoint an Indian craft, and then it can send it to the missile on the craft and shoot it without the radar and the J-10 ever having to be exposed for the Rafale to be able to see.
So
Um,
I'm sorry, can you backtrack a little bit and explain to me again? And again, understanding that I know zero about
okay.
weapons other than what I read when need arises. So how did we get to 500 kilometers from, let's say, 100,
200.
200?
So,
Yeah.
so the an airborne early warning and control plane, which are called AWACS, are the planes that have that big dish on the top of it and look funny. So
Mm-hmm.
that has a massive radar on it that is able to push out the range of, wherever it's moving. It's got a 500 kilometer, radar range that it's
So
going.
that's
So
a separate plane from the J-10
yes,
that
ma'am.
Pakistan had airborne at the time.
A possibility. If they're starting to get attacked, sending an AWACS in the air would have been strategically sound to do to be able to have better early warning systems up in the air
And
and count.
Pakistan has that capability. It has that planes. We know.
Yes, they have a couple from Sweden. I think 8 or 9 from Sweden, the SAB 2000s, but they also have the ZDK 3, which is a Chinese one. In the what's happened so far, we can almost see Chinese hardware used most of the way. Their artillery systems they provided, Pakistan could have been, we're speculating, could have been the ones that were utilized to fire on the across the LOC. The aviation systems of the J-10 with the PL-15, as well as the drone strikes. It's most likely, unverified, of course, that, the Pakistani drones used were the models based on Qingwang 3 models, which is a Chinese exported drone. So you can see Chinese equipment possibly being used in every portion of this engagement and escalation so far, which is a great weapons testing place for China since none of their equipment has been tested other than desert cross vehicles in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which they're not weapon systems, they're just transportation vehicles.
So I was gonna ask you this. How significant is this that some of these weapons, including the J-10s and the PLEs, PL-15Es, how significant it is that this is the first time they're being tested in real battlefield conditions?
It's extremely significant because until now, we can only speculate about capabilities of weapon systems, which, when certain nations like claim their capabilities of a new weapon system, they can be inflated. So it, causes fear across adversaries or what have not. So getting an actual a proving ground in a sense to be able to test and see the capabilities in combat stress environments and combat situations is extremely important for one US and other nations that are watching to be able to counter what it is, and two, it actually gives China the purpose of testing their equipment without having to risk any of their personnel. um,
So, as you mentioned, US is also watching. How do US systems right now compare to Chinese technology? Because one of the things, and I've seen some really funny Chinese troll videos. I don't know if you've seen them. I may link some of them to this story. Um, but French Rafale, so Western Europe versus Chinese J-10s. J-10s win. Chinese are very happy. What are US weapons experts thinking?
So you look at it that the weapon systems that were used were not confirmed, but they're made to counter U.S. Capabilities. Everything that, if you look at China as a whole, ever since the 80s and 90s, they've tried to get away from having a deterrent, or they've tried to get a deterrence against U.S. power. Can't, during that time, they couldn't make aircraft carriers, so they focused on how to take down aircraft carriers, and that's why they have all these sea mines. That's why they have, the submarine fleets. Yeah, the Kitty Hawk incident back in 2006, I think, when the Chinese submarine came up in the middle of a U.S. formation and carrier battle group going through the East China Sea. So instead of spending a lot of money to match what the United States has, they utilize less amount of money to find pinpoint pricks that will destroy what the U.S. has. So the PL-15 Echo or the PL-15 was merit on how to take down, U.S. stealth fighters, U.S. fighters like the F-22, a Generation 5 fighter. Now, how it would stand up is unknown because you look at the RCS systems, the radar. The RCS is basically a way for radars to make their cross section smaller. That way, an F-35 and an F-22, they come up as the size of a marble or a golf ball. I'm sorry. They come up as the size of a marble and a golf ball on radar systems. So they make their cross section really, really small. Now, these 4.5 generation fighters, like the J-10 and the Rafale, they do have RCS for the cross section to make them look smaller, but they're not stealth capable to be able to have that small of a rendering on the radar and stuff. So they're still able to track. So how it would stand up to an F-22 is still unknown, and unless, the US is able to get a PL-15 and reverse engineer it and try it out themselves. But it really gives a lot to the J-10s and their construction because the Charlies came out later. The J-10 Charlie. So they have a little bit more upgrades than the original J-10 Alphas and stuff that Pakistan was originally going to get those in the Bravos. So the J-10 Charlies are newer than the Rafales. They've had more upgrades, even though they're both 4.5 generations. The J-10 came out, the Charlie version has come out like a lot sooner. Like the Pak Air Force didn't start receiving them until 2022, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but like 2020, 2022, I believe is when they started receiving the J-10 Charlie. So they're still formally new, and there's been no aviation problem. They haven't had to deploy them since because the last thing with India was back in 2019, and where the one Indian craft got shot down. But think of it like when the U.S. went into Iraq and Afghanistan, everybody was looking at the United States weapons and their capabilities and stuff because it's the first time that, the U.S. had to use a massive amount of power, for decades pretty much. So it was all these new weapons that, the United States boasted, showed about, JDAMs, Mark 9 Reaper drones and all this stuff. That's exactly what's going on in India and Pakistan because nobody's seen China's military in action or their equipment in action until now. Like, sure, you might have some drones make it to Sudan and stuff like that, but those aren't, conventional operations. Those are asymmetrical operations, which, you saw America, how they dealt with asymmetrical operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and even, how, the naval-centric strategy in the Red Sea, didn't work for America for a sustainability option for the Houthis just because it's a different type of conflict. It's not a conventional conflict, which is what the strategy applied for. So measuring devices and equipment in different type of combat zones, asymmetrical and conventional, is the biggest test you can get for a weapon system. And so I just think that if it does escalate further, we're going to get.
And we'll get to what happens if it does escalate further. Looking at what you saw so far, should America be worried?
I mean, you have to think about that's a difficult question. I don't think so because one, we're not going to fight, China anytime soon. China doesn't have the capability to project beyond, their region. Their military is utilized, especially in their Western Theater Command, more for security, domestic security. They can't take 1 million people out of China and take them anything because they don't have the logistics to. They don't have the ships to be able to move 1,000 or 1 million Marines, or they don't have the transportation planes to move them anywhere. So China can't, and their navy, even though it's changing into a blue water navy, it's still a loitering, coastal navy. Even though in a decade, 2 decades, that's going to be a different conversation. But as for right now, in my opinion, there's not a need to worry because 10% of their budget last year, was utilized for just exercises around Taiwan, not actually doing anything, or anything like that. Like, so China can't maneuver anywhere beyond, its regional area, and it's even struggling there, as you see in the Philippines, as you see as they're trying to reach out to South Korea, and as they're trying to reach out to Japan on diplomatic terms. They're not capable of, projecting their power beyond their region, especially towards the United States. So should the weapon systems are to be, focused on as a threat, yes. Um, but I don't see the U.S. Having to deal with any Chinese weapon systems in anytime soon. But you can turn the page on the history book, and you never know what's going to be on the next page. So,
But let me rephrase my question.
okay.
Should the US worry that given the performance of the Chinese weapon systems, the US sales in the international marketplace would have serious competition, and people may say, maybe we should just buy from China. And I don't know the prices, but maybe they'll be cheaper as well.
You can be concerned on that level. Yes, ma'am. So, for instance, what India is dealing with right now is either taking F-35s from the US, which, just to turn it on for a test flight costs $40,000, as opposed to older models or, European models and stuff, which $4,000 to turn it on. So not just the price tag that comes with it, it's the maintenance and everything else. So definitely with a blocking of U.S. production and the bottleneck of U.S. defense industry, as the United States is missing delivery orders, you can see that for the defense industry base maybe shifting to other competitors. China is one, obviously. Turkey, South Korea. Turkey's defense industry doubled last year alone, like their income alone. Um, but definitely they should be looked at as a peer or near peer to Western technology for that level, for the 4.5s. As how they stand up to F-22s and the fifth generation ones, that's something a little bit different. But this does give them more credibility than, certain Russian systems, as we saw, Israel attack with F-35s on S-300, 400 possibility air defense systems of Russia and Iran, and not a single jet F-35 was shot down. And that was a sortie of over 100, flights and stuff. So for generational purposes, the 4.5s, yeah, you can be worried about it. Now, if you're one of those few countries that have some of the fifth generation US ones, then you should be all right. You shouldn't have to be concerned. But the majority of the countries across the world do not have that. So yes, it is a concern, and that they have a near peer rival with new technology coming out of China that is showing that it is succeeding, if reports are to be believed.
So let me just ask you one last question, which is, oh, did the Rafale ever have any chance? Could they have made a maneuver to avoid this, or were they doomed just because of this longer radar range, which means that they were attacked before they even knew they were attacked?
They could have spotted them first as well. It's whoever spots and targets the person first is gonna, for the most part, be able to win in air-to-air combat. Now, it's speculating, saying that India didn't expect, any intercept flights to come out of Pakistan, since India is claiming they never left the border. They stayed within India and fired from India, and everything, and never went into Pakistani airspace. Um, Also, you have to ask the question why, India didn't have any AWACS or early, or advanced radar systems set up, knowing that they were going on the attack, to be able to spot these J-10s earlier and stuff that were intercepting. There's a lot of unknown right now. Now, as time goes on and more briefings come out, and we pick them apart for what to believe and it might be stretched a little bit, then we'll get a better feel about why it went down the way it did. Because the first look, first shoot is the key when it comes to air-to-air combat, and the Meteor, I'm sorry, the Rafale should be able to see, even though it's can't detect and range as far, they should have had something loitering to be able to pick up, advanced radar signatures and everything.
Thank you so much for giving me time.